She was born in Cornwall, southwest England, and she lived there till she was 11. Then her parents decided to tour England in a camper van, and they eventually moved to Somerton in Jess. She studied for Batch S, and now she is studying computer science at the LT. Her dad grew up in New Orleans, and he moved to England when he was 11, but her mother is true Cornish, apparently. So she has a little sister called Bryony, who's 16, and now I will leave the mic to her. Please be attentive, and thank you for coming.
Hello everybody. Well, I was planning on presenting myself, but now it seems I don't need to. So, when they asked me to do a conference, they told me to pick a passion. I don't have very many, but the ones I do have are quite intense. My highest passion, I suppose, is Vikings, and especially mythology. But if I say Vikings, you don't tend to think, first off, of literature. You're more likely to think of things like murder, pillaging, and all sorts of absolutely lovely things that you were likely to see in Game of Thrones. But the reason we know that they did all of these things is because they left behind lots of literature. So, who were the Vikings, for anyone who might not be aware? So they were farmers, fishermen and sailors. They lived in Scandinavia, so Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Denmark and Finland, just before the Middle Ages, so around the years 500 to 1100 AD. They were at home, they were generally peaceful, but that didn't last very long. So we're going to be looking at their literature today. When it comes to literature, there are two kinds. There is fiction and non-fiction. So there's what's real and what's invented. So we'll first look at the literature that is as real as can be expected from the time. So we're going to look at the Icelandic sagas. Secondly, we'll look at fiction, so stories that were invented, which is the Edda, where all of the legends are collected. And finally, because this is a conference for people learning English, we're going to look at the links between Old Norse, the Viking language, and English. Because, as you know, the Vikings invaded England and they left behind an awful lot, including their language. So, first off, the Icelandic sagas. So these are stories that were written down in about the 13th and 14th centuries, some by a famous Icelandic priest called Snorri Sturluson. Although the events that they describe took place mainly in the 10th and 11th centuries. They're mainly about families, towns, living their everyday lives, as well as politics. They had their own centralised parliament in Iceland at the time called Althing, which was a parliament and a court. So we have court hearings written down. It goes on for pages and pages. But the main topic of these stories are family feuds. So arguments between families that would degenerate into basically war over anything. So Iceland, you're probably all familiar with because of all the volcanoes, that disrupt the airports. But it's an island in the North Pacific. It's very isolated. It was first colonised in the 8th century by some Irish monks, but it was deserted for a while until Norway decided to send its criminals and prisoners there. Despite its close links to Norway, it's very isolated, and they're very cut off, and the sagas can almost be considered a sort of social experiment by putting lots of people on one island and just letting them build a society. So we're going to look at the most famous saga, and one of the very few that's been translated into French as well, called the Brenningnial saga. So this one is about family feuds again. The event's between about 960 and 1020, and there are two main characters. There is Gunnar Harmunderson. So he is a warrior, and he's the stereotypical hero, the good guy. He wins everything. He's handsome. The women love him. Mr. Perfect. And the other character is his best friend Njals, who is a lawyer. And to be a hero, you need to have enemies to fight. Gunnar had plenty of enemies. So Njal, as a lawyer, would spend a lot of time convincing Gunnar's enemies not to kill him. So this is the Stargate stuff is incredibly long, so I've just picked a passage to tell you which kind of stands alone. So Gunnar, as usual, is making enemies, and Njal decides to talk them down to banishing him from Iceland instead of killing him. So they agree. So Gunnar rides off to the seashore to get on his boat, but the story goes that he got to the sea and he turned around and he looked back at Iceland and he found it so beautiful he couldn't bear to leave. So he went home again. His enemies found out and they followed him. So it's a bit like a scene from a western, a sort of standoff. As he hides in the house and he shoots arrows through the windows, and they surround the house and they throw spears, they shoot arrows, they even shove swords through the walls to try and kill him and his wife. So there's that standoff going on and he's firing with his arrows, but eventually his string breaks. And so he turns to his wife, Gerda, who is a very charming person, and he asks her if he can borrow some of her hair to fix it. Gerda reminds him that one time he slapped her, so she says no. So Gunnar dies. And Gerda has a reputation for this. Her previous husband also slapped her once, and she got a friend to kill him for her. But this is a sort of story. That book is at least 50 lots of the same story. It's fantastic. Should you be interested in reading the rest of that saga or the others, the theme is pretty consistent. There's the Icelandic saga database online where they're available in English, well, Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish, and a couple are in French. If not, in English, there's a page called Sagas for the Impatient, because if a saga is written down, it would be as long as Harry Potter. So it takes every chapter and condenses it into a few sentences written in modern English. It's much easier to understand. Anyway, part 2, the Edda. So the Edda is in two main parts. There is the prose Edda, which is it's like a school textbook on how to write skaldic poetry, so not terribly interesting, but the poetic Edda is where they wrote down all the myths. So a quick look at the prose Edda. There's the prologue, which introduces the Norse gods. Originally, they were Trojan heroes who escaped from Troy and decided to start a new life in Scandinavia, because who wouldn't? Then there's Gylfaginning, which is about a squirrel who gets tricked. It's a rather strange story. And the last two, Skapskapamal and Hatatal, are basically lessons on how to write poetry, different ways of writing, different vocabulary you use, what rhymes to use. And it's set up as a dialogue between the god of poetry, Bragi, and the god of the sea, Aegir. Now we get to the poetic Edda, which is much more interesting. It's got all the stories about the gods. So there's the death of Balder, you might have heard of, Ragnarok, the end of the world, fire, flames, it's got everything. And Loki's crawl, where he walks up to each and every god and tells them all of their faults, and they punish him. So, few gods. There's obviously the most famous ones that you will know from the films, but it's a very loose adaptation. So, you've got Odin, who is the All-Father, the ruler of Asgard, associated with war and magic, and he's the father of most of the other gods. So yeah, he's the one who's in charge. He wants to exchange one eye for wisdom. So that's why he only has one eye. Make him smarter. Then there's Thor, who is the god of thunder and oak trees and lightning and all sorts of other things. What he's god of changes depending on what you read. He can be god of anything you want. And then finally, of course, there's Loki, who is a god, part Jotun, part giant, an ice giant. They're generally the enemies of the gods. So sometimes Loki can help the gods, and sometimes he just causes more problems for them and is brutally punished. But I think there are some gods that do not get enough love. There are some that are much more interesting than they see. Firstly, there's Balder. He was one of Thor's brothers, so another son of Odin, and he was a god of light and purity, and he was generally good. The unfortunate thing about him is that he was killed. I'll see if I can tell the story without going too fast. Right, he is the son of Odin and his wife Frigg. And Frigg loved him very dearly. So she asked everything. She asked trees, she asked rocks, she asked rivers to not hurt him. She did this to everything in the world, and only one thing refused. Mistletoe refused to not hurt him. So Loki found out about this, and every evening they would the gods would spend time throwing things at him, such as sticks and stones, to prove that he would not be killed by them. But Loki gets some mistletoe, and he puts it on the end of an arrow and shoots it at him and kills him. And that's how Balder dies. Then there's Idun, who is the goddess of youth and apples, because a lot of religions seem to associate apples with life and longevity, a bit like Christianity. In fact, these two gods, as Christianity came to Scandinavia, the Vikings got very confused, and Balder became a kind of a Jesus figure, and Idun became kind of an Eve figure. They got very, very mixed up. And last of all, there's Freyr. I'm sure you've heard of Freya, the goddess of love and beauty. This is her twin brother, who is god of everything. He's god of spring and sunshine, but also everything manly. And every shrine, like a mini temple for Freyr, is covered in carvings of penises. What do you do? Right, another story I thought, one of my favourites, called Thrindskvida, and it's about Loki and Thor. So, once upon a time, Thor wakes up and his hammer is missing. I'm sure you're all aware of how attached Thor is to his hammer, if you've seen the films. So he was not happy about that. So if anything goes wrong in Asgard, it's either because of Loki or because of the giants. This time Loki is innocent, so they blamed on the giants. So to get to the giants' land, Loki goes to Freya and asks him to lend her magic falcon cloak. This is a cloak that when you wear it, it will turn you into a bird, so you can fly. So she lends him the cloak, and he flies to the land of the ice giants called Jotunheim. So he gets there, and he meets the king of the giants, and he sees that he has his hammer. The king of the giants, however, says, I will only give your hammer back if I can marry Freya. Now, Loki goes home, and he decides to tell Freya the news. Freya is not happy and says no. But Loki comes up with a better plan. Let's send Thor instead. So they dress him up as a bride, but they don't get rid of the beard. And this is basically just how stupid giants can be. So they get there to the wedding feast. Everything goes as planned. And the other giant marries Thor. And then, at the end of the feast, they bring, well, hang on, before the feast, Thor still didn't get caught out after he really, really ate a lot. You're going to go on about it in the story for ages. He ate 6 salmon, a whole ox, and 3 barrels of meat. And they still didn't realise he wasn't a girl. And anyway, eventually, they have to bring forward the gift, which is the thing that they exchange for the bride. In this case, it was Thor's hammer. So he sees the hammer, and he loses it. He drops the disguise, he runs across the room, picks up the hammer, and in true Viking style, kills everybody. There's a funny thing about the Viking stories. It's not always the people who go in all guns blazing, fighting immediately that win. They always value cunning in their stories, which is why Loki succeeds so often, because he uses his brains instead of just hitting things. They often have a surprising amount of morals in their stories, despite their reputation. So they believed in these myths till about the year 1000, which was when the final Icelanders converted to Christianity. Well, they were still a bit confused, but officially they were Christian. So if you'd like to read more stories like that, then you can go to Project Gutenberg. They're all available for free, but only in English or Dutch or Finnish. Right, and moving swiftly along to the last part. There's somebody at the door. There's somebody at the door. Yeah, so the links between Old Norse and English. Right, I'm sure you're all very aware that the French language has borrowed a lot of words from the English language. However, the English language borrowed a lot of words from the Viking language. To give you some examples of words you have in French as well as English. Cake, which you have adopted, was kaka, which meant cake as well in Old Norse. Score, as in to count a score, it's from Old Norse as well, and it meant to carve a line in a piece of wood, so to keep count. And then ski comes from Old Norse. It had the word ski, which meant stick of wood. And then, of course, steak comes from Old Norse, and it means to fry. That does not say what you think it says. It says thorn, not thorn, thorn. It's a different letter. Right, you know English has that horrible sound that French people have a lot of trouble with, and even I have a lot of trouble with, the. What is it? That is because of the Vikings. They have this lovely letter called thorn, which is still a letter in the modern Icelandic alphabet, and it's where a lot of English words, you see lots of links between the Old Norse and the English. But basically, to try and translate it, because we eventually lost the runes the Vikings left. So we turned it into a Y. So that's why you have tu and you. But in between it became thou. Somewhere the THs and the Ys got mixed up, which means a lot of these now have just totally gone to TH. So you have things like there and thar, thick and thick, thuri and thrir. All words you got from the Vikings with this sound in them. Almost all of the English words that start with that sound are from Old Norse. But in English, I don't know if you ever learned about nursery rhymes. I know my mother was an English teacher. She used to teach all the nursery rhymes to the kids, but I don't know how that works everywhere else. There's a nursery rhyme called London Bridge is Falling Down, that you might be aware of. I don't know how to sing it for you. And it's a theory that it was based on a story of a Viking raid on London, where they destroyed a bridge. Olaf II of Norway fell out with the current king of the Anglo-Saxon country and decided he was going to tear his bridge down. Unfortunately, they didn't win the battle and they got sent home. So this is a translation. It was left in one of the other sagas called Heimskringla, which was more about Norwegian kings and their families. So this is the English version we have now, and then you can see the similarities between the Old Norse version that they left behind in the sagas. Of course, in the Norse version, they get the gods more involved than the English one does now. There's also another nursery rhyme called Jack and Jill, which I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with. That's also from Old Norse, and it's strange because when I was younger, we used to write parodies of nursery rhymes, and I wrote a version of this about Vikings, not realising it was already about Vikings. So this is the original. They were called Hughie and Bill instead of Jack and Jill. And in the English one, they go up the hill to get a bucket of water, and in the Viking one, they go to the moon to get some water. And they're taken by the man who lives in the moon. In English, they just fall down again. But they think that Huki and Bill were names that the Vikings gave to different phases of the moon. But I can't really be sure. Right, and lastly, the days of the week, which are very, very closely connected with the Norse gods even today. Okay, it starts from Sunday, which isn't that big a surprise. It's like Lundi, Moon Day. That's the same. Then you get to Tuesday, and the conversion seems to have moved letters, but it doesn't matter. Which is Tyr's Day. Tyr was the god of war, like the Viking equivalent to the Roman god Mars. Except he lost his hand when he used his insurance. It normally compared with modern Norwegian because modern Icelandic doesn't use the gods' names anymore, but Norwegian they still do, and it's Tyr's Dag behind this. Yeah. Anyway, then Wednesday is Odin's Day. There was a lot of confusion with Odin because lots of religions have one main god. They might have lots of other gods, but they have one chief. And Odin, his name changed depending where you were in Europe. In the north it was Odin, but as you got further south in England, he got called Wodan. And in fact, the English word god comes from the Old English of Godan, which was another one of his names. So when you say god, you're technically saying Odin. So that's why we have Wednesday, which is Wodan's Day. And in Norwegian, you can see his name went from Odin to On. So it's Onsdag. Then there's Thursday, which hasn't changed much, it's Thursday, which is still Torsdag in Norwegian. Friday, which is Thursday, so don't forget to make a shrine to a penis on Friday. Saturday isn't so interesting, that's just for Saturn, and then Sunday, again, is for the sun, but the word sun in English also comes from Old Norse, so I guess that counts. So, if you're interested in etymology, I know I am, there's a very good website called etymonline.com, which is for English etymology, which is very interesting. Right, so sources, and now how I said at the beginning, it made me choose a passion. Well, it became a passion and it needed an outlet. So a couple of years ago, should you be interested, I wrote a book about Viking stuff. It's a story, but it's Viking-y, and you can find it on Amazon or Smashwords. Only available in English for the moment, I'm afraid, but I haven't had time to translate it. And that's all. Thank you. Any questions?
If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I can bring you the microphone. No one? Okay. Well, thank you, Jessica. That was extremely interesting. And may I point out that Vikings and Viking in literature is also my passion, and that I will most certainly buy Jessica's book. So I'm doing some shameless advertising for her right now. And well, I'm completely impartial and unbiased because I hadn't met Jessica until this morning. So, well, if you want to learn English and you want to learn more about Vikings, just go and buy a book. Just do it. It's on Amazon, you have a Kindle, or you have an iPad, and just do it, it's easy. Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and I'll switch back to French for a minute, please, s'il vous plaît. La liste n'a pas fini le